Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Word of Faith Responds and Speaks Out. It is so good to be with you again. We are members of the Word of Faith Fellowship. My name is Mark Morris, and we have been telling you the truth about the Word of Faith Fellowship. We've been going through a lot of the false accusations that have been made against our church and telling you the truth. And the other thing that we've been doing is sharing with you about the goodness of God that we have seen in our lives. We really have in our hearts to just share how good God is. And we've been having people come on this program now for several weeks who have just testified and shared about just the wonderful God that we serve and how God has so transformed our lives. One of the things that you've heard for the past programs is that God has a wonderful plan for our life. And that plan is full of blessings and life. And the most important thing that we could ever have is that relationship with Jesus Christ in our hearts. And we also have seen that so many times the devil has a plan for our life. And so many of us have gone down the devil's plan for our life, even at a young age. And when you go down the devil's plan, it is nothing but destruction and death and torment. And we've all experienced that to some extent. And today I have three men with me. I have Nino, I have Joe English, and I have Andy Kidd. And all three of these men have experienced going down the wrong path for their life, and they've also experienced the keeping power of God on their lives. As they were going down these wrong paths, the paths that the devil had for them, God's keeping power was so strong on their lives, and they want to share with you about how God kept them. Not only that, but God brought in divine connections, divine relationships in their life just at the right time to pull them into God's plan. And so you're going to hear some amazing testimonies from all three of these men. We're going to try to pack this in 30 minutes. And just to give you a little background, all of these men came to Word of Faith Fellowship about 27 years ago, at the same time I came, and they were all involved in the music industry before they came. They were all friends with each other. They actually came together to our church, and actually Neno and Andy Kidd were involved with many different aspects of the music industry. Neno was a music producer. He owned his own record company. He was a music promoter, a concert promoter, a booking agent, and he did a little bit of everything you could do in the music industry. At one time, he lived in Nashville. He knew everybody who was in the music industry, and out of that place, he met Andy Kidd. Now, Andy was also in the music producing industry, was a music engineer, and worked with a lot of music artists, and at some point even owned Loudon Guitar. Is that right, Andy?
Yeah, that's right.
And a very prestigious guitar company that made guitars. So both of these men knew each other in the music industry. And now Joe English, sitting next to me, was actually a musician and a singer for many years. He was he played and sung with Paul McCartney for years, and then he had his own band and traveled around and performed. And God definitely has transformed his life as well, and you're going to hear from him. So we are going to try to squeeze this in here. Listen closely because there's so much to cover. I'm going to just start off with Ray. Would you share about your life, Ray?
Sure. I'm also very, very grateful for the keeping power of God. You know, when I was young, I was a very troubled youth. You know, before I was 20 years old, I was in jail 4 different times for different things, driving under the influence, driving my car into 3 parked cars, you know, breaking and entering, peace demonstrating in New York, all those types of things. And God kept a hold of me, and I was always very grateful that he did. It was in that period of time, not shortly after that I ended up going to Vietnam because of one of the things I did. The devil constantly, was trying to kill me in many different ways. But it was around 1972 I started turning my heart toward God. And in that process, I got involved, in music because during the period of time when I was young, I was doing many much drugs and involved in much music. But when I started to turn my heart to God, I involved myself again in music, and before I knew it, like you said, I became a concert promoter, a record owner, a little bit of everything involved in the music. One of the first record companies we had was Refuge Records, which was a rock label, and then we introduced the very first heavy metal Christian label, which I've done great repentance for, because it just never was God, that it had been done, and so during that period of time when we would do all the different music and be involved in the music, all we did was take what the world had and recreate it into a manner that we could add Christian lyrics, because that's all we knew. We didn't know anything else, And truthfully, what happened was that we were recreating our own idols that we had lived with all our youth, because that's what we wanted. And we were just like the Israelites, when they got out in the wilderness, they basically built their golden calf. Well, us recreating all those, musicians and all those people that we loved, or thought we loved, was nothing more than us creating, our own golden calf. But it was, I had taken a journey with one of our artists that Andy Kidd had introduced me to. I had gone to Russia, and while I was in Russia with this specific artist, all I heard about was a church in North Carolina. And they kept talking about Sam and Jane Whaley. So when I got back from Russia, it was not long after that I decided I wanted to go see this church in North Carolina. And I came down here, and I just experienced so much love. It was like you just couldn't believe how much people cared about you and cared about what you were, and were, not worried who you were or where you were from. They cared that you needed to know Jesus in deeper ways. So one of the first services that I went to, the worship and praise was there. And this worship and praise was totally different than anything I had experienced, because I had experienced all the different types of music. I'd seen all the types of music. I was involved in worship and praise music. I had a label that did worship and praise. But this was special. These people sang with all their hearts. And the leaders there, it wasn't the music, because it wasn't great music, it wasn't great singing, although it was strong singing, strong and powerful. And the very presence of God was there. It wasn't like what we did. We manufactured. All we did was manufacture a sound. We created an atmosphere. We gave people what they really wanted in their souls. It got their emotions. We moved their emotions. It's like churches today. You go into a church today, it's like going into a rock concert. They have their lights, they have their multimedia presentation, they have their smoke, they have everything that we used to do in the rock. But they don't have Jesus at that level. They don't have the power of God. So the first time I was at Word of Faith and I experienced that worship and praise, I said, this is different. I need to understand this. This is something I desperately need in my own life. And it was not, I think Pastor Jane shared with me at one point how when she was in front, and I think it was Kmar at the time, and God showed her what the devil was going to do. He's going to take the music of the world, and he's going to put the lyrics of Christian and the Bible on that music, and it would be one of the greatest attacks in the church. And that's what we did. It was exactly what we did. And they were praying the whole time for people to come out. My wife and I thought about it, and we started realizing when they were praying, we realized that's when God started to change our heart.
And you're talking about the pastors, the people at Word of Faith were praying for people in the music industry to come out.
To come out. And we started questioning, what are we here? Why are we here? I mean, the artists, they were drinking, they were on drugs. There was great infidelity, it was all the things. It was right back to secular rock and roll. It was no different, it became absolutely no different in the whole thing. And I know that, Joe and I have known each other 40 years. Andy and I have known each other almost 37 years. And when I met Joe was the first artist that was on Refuge Records, one of our labels. And when I met Joe had basically, fought through and come out of a lot of things. And we did a record for him, and it was a very successful record. But it wasn't long after that I realized, that Joe still had a drug problem. He was still involved in drugs, like many of the people, that were involved in that period of time. There was guys that were going to AA. I mean, guys that are going to jail for crimes, that you never heard about. But because you were in the community, you began to see this was a mess. I was a mess too. But truthfully, I didn't even realize it was a mess because everybody else was such a big mess that I actually thought I was doing okay. So I got away from it and realized I was just as much a mess as everybody else. But Joe, there was one time with Joe that I remember, and I went to his house, and this was basically when I realized that he was still having a problem. And I found him on his couch, and his eyes were rolled back into his, eye sockets, and I tried to get him up as best I could. I got him up and walking. He almost overdosed. He was almost gone. And I walked him around the house, walked him around the building. I just kept doing things, that I just keep him moving, But Joe and his wife are some of our best friends, and my wife and I are so grateful to what Word of Faith. I don't know where we would be. We would likely be dead, most of us that are sitting here. We wouldn't be hanging around right now, I can tell you that. And my wife, every night when we go to bed, we were grateful to God for what Word of Faith means to us. I have a son and daughter. They have grandchildren, husbands and wives, and truthfully, I don't know where they would be if we had never got here. My son and my daughter probably would have followed the same way that I followed. I was a mess. So every night we go to bed, we say, thank you, Jesus. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jesus, for what you've done for us. But thank you, Jesus, for allowing us to have the privilege to have called us here. That would find people who cared about us, who wanted to help us, and cared every day. It wasn't, and again, not because of who we were, it was because they knew we had needs, and they cared great about us.
And you mentioned that you knew Joe before you came here, and you were just telling about how you saw him having the drug problem in his own life. Was this while he was doing Christian concerts and producing these Christian albums with you?
Yes, I mean, in the beginning I didn't realize it, but yes, as we got on, then I began, his band members started telling me of different issues and problems that were going, in essence, he was getting high and going out and playing before thousands of people. It was a sad thing.
And how did Joe come here with you? Did you bring Joe with you?
Joe, at the time, we came, Joe and his wife, Joe's wife and I came down first, one of the other gentlemen, and we saw what was here. And we knew that Joe could get help. At that moment in time, Joe was at a rehab. That's why he didn't come the first time. He was at a drug rehab in Pennsylvania. And so we knew that he had to come because we had tried everything. We had him in drug rehabs. We sent him to other ministries. We sent him everywhere. We tried to get him help. We couldn't help him. And it wasn't until he got here and the prayer and the things started to, happen in his life that he started to change. He really began to get free, in the whole thing.
And so you've just heard from Ray Nino, and we're going to hear from Joe English now. And Joe, you pick up where Ray left off. Tell us about your life.
This morning I was woke up and I was just laying in bed, and I went over. I thought about my life. I thought about coming here this morning, and I said, Jesus, what do I share? And the first thing is, I'm so grateful that Ray. It's hard to talk without crying. That Ray and his wife had it in their heart to help my wife and I, a long time ago, and brought us down here. And the other thing I thought about, I look back at my life, from an early age, I started playing drums, and that was my life. From 15 years old, that was my life. And I had some issues where I had surgeries on my ankle, and I had to wear a brace. And the children around me some were very cruel, called me crippled, And then my parents bought me a drum set, and that was it. I learned to play, and I had talent, and I used that. And I remember it said when people would make fun of me because I couldn't walk right and stuff, I said, I'll show you one day. One day, I'll show you that I'm going to make it. And then, I'm going to make a long story short. And years went by. I played music long before I got the job with Paul McCartney and Wings. And then 1975, I got that job. And it was a culmination of all those years. It was almost like that thing in my heart where I'll show you was an unsaid thing in my heart. There I was. And this morning I thought again, like, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul and ends up in hell? I mean, I had everything. I was with Wings for almost 4 years and traveled all around the world, met all the stars, flew on the Concorde, the second flight of the Concorde at the speed of sound, and I had 200 acres of land. I had 2 Porsches. I had this. I had that. I had that. You know what? But I was a tormented, lonely fella. Had all this stuff on the surface, and everybody would pat you on the back. Oh, you're really good. You're really doing good. But inside, I knew I wasn't doing good. Then I ended up, I'm trying to keep this all together. And I met Ray. And I just think about coming here in 1990 when I met Jane Whaley. And she looked at me and gave me a hug, and she could see that I was a troubled man. But you know what? She cared nothing about. In the world, they all want to hear about your history with Paul McCartney and Wings. They want to know about that side. She wanted to help me because she knew that I had problems, and she could care less what I had done in the past. And I had never really run into anybody like that except my wife Dale, who we've been married 40 years. I mean, there's another person who, anybody that could have lasted that long with me, that's a miracle, because I was not a nice man. But anyways, back to coming here, and I hear about all the attacks and hear all the stuff that's said about the church and said about Sam and Jane, especially Jane. And I remember back when I came here, how messed up I was. And I remember the love that she showed me. So really, nobody can really tell me anything, because I know the truth in my heart, that when I was desperate and down and out, she just took me, held me, and told me she loved me. And God was going to help you if you want help. And I've seen, since I've been here, I've had struggles since I've been here. You can get help if you want help. If you open your heart and say, Jesus, help me. I need help. I'm going to tell you, he comes running. He's right there to help you. But I was a stubborn young man, and I was a stubborn older man. And as the years go by and the more I submit my heart to Jesus, all that stubbornness has gone away. And I would not trade anything. Again, like I said, the last couple of days when I knew I was coming on to do this interview, Mark, I thought about all the things that people think that strive for all their life. They want cars, they want this, they want houses, they want all the things that, when those things wear out, here I am, lonely and back in that same position. And the only thing that, with me personally, the only thing that I've experienced that brings me peace and joy is when I submit my heart to God and he helps me. There's no other peace, no other joy I can't even express. I know what the world has to offer. Like I go to the prison, I help at the prison ministries. I tell those boys, you sit there, you're talking to a young boy, and you tell him, listen, when you go back to your cell at night and all the lights go out and it's real quiet, just lay there quietly and just say, Jesus, if you're real, please show yourself to me. Please, Jesus, help me. I tell those boys that. I tell those boys that because I know that's what I did. And that's what I do today. Jesus, I need you. You know what? He's right there. He shows up. He'll give you anything you want. And I ran and ran and ran and ran and ran from God. And I'm just grateful, like I said, that with my wife, we're still together. I'm happy. And I'm glad. I hope I'm covering everything that I need to cover, but I wouldn't trade anything. I wouldn't trade anything for the life that I have here and the people that love you. What else do you need? You know, when you get older, you want a family that loves you. When I need help, there's somebody there to help me. When I'm going a little the wrong way, there's somebody there to help me. That's what it's all about.
Would you sing for us?
I will sing. And this song here, like real quick, back to what Ray was talking about when we came here, the church started writing songs, and God was giving Jane Whaley songs and stuff, and I started to hear things that I'd been with the best songwriters in the world. And all of a sudden, I started to hear music that touched my heart and my soul, and I went, this is different. This is what I've been looking for. And this is one of the songs. It's called Your Love Never Fails. And let me tell you, the love of God never fails. When you submit your heart to Him, He shows up immediately.
Your love never fails. It has covered a multitude of sin. Truly we have seen your mercy and your power to restore, repairer of the breach, the restorer of our soul. No man can ever know such great love except through Jesus, as we have surrendered our hearts. We have truly seen the love of God. Oh, what joy it brings to be dealt with as your true son. In your judgment we have found refuge and safety. Oh, we have loved your hand upon our life, repairer of the breach. You are the restorer of my soul. No man can ever know such great love except through Jesus, as we have surrendered our lives. We truly see the love of God, as we have surrendered our lives. We have truly seen the love of God.
Thank you very much, Joe. And that you just heard the heart of a man who has met Jesus. And, you know, like Joe said, when you meet Jesus, it really doesn't matter about trying to seek all those things in the world, because Jesus is the one who can actually satisfy everything in our heart. And we have Andy Kidd here. Andy came from Ireland many years ago and had quite a life before he came here in Ireland. Andy, would you share with us, we just have a few minutes left, would you share with us about your life?
Well, I think back to when I was a very small child. I was aware even at that stage my father had had a remarkable conversion in his life, and I was very grateful to have grown up in the church, the Baptist church, and I was aware from a very early age that God had a plan and a purpose for my life, and music was a part of that, and there was a gift and a talent there, and but as I got older in my teenage years, I began to be very influenced by the world, started listening to the music of the world, and found out that I could easily recreate that music. And it wasn't long before I was working with all the top so-called Christian artists in Europe, and actually it was that was how I came to meet Ray, and there I was thinking that I was doing something that really helped people, and of course later on I was to find out that it wasn't helping at all, and I was seeing the same devastation in lives all around me that Ray was seeing. Think back to many of my closest friends from even back then, and their lives today are devastated because they pursued after the world, and that music became their god. And but we had a situation in our personal lives, my wife and I, and she had really bad postpartum depression after our first two children was born. And it was through that and a miraculous circumstance that we ended up coming here, literally it just with a few hours notice. And Sam and Jane had it that they had on their hearts that this is where we needed to come for help. All the way to from a little Belfast is pretty much where I grew up, and all the trouble and everything there. And I was just thinking yesterday and thinking like Joe before we came here, what an amazing Father God that we have, that will plan and organize in every little detail of our lives to bring us to that place where we can find that place of surrender and submission to His will for our lives, which is very different than what the devil's plan for us is, because that's destruction and heartache. And I was just reading in the Bible this morning, a verse in 2 Peter, and it says this: "Therefore, believers, be all the more diligent to make certain about His calling and choosing you. Be sure that your behavior reflects and confirms your relationship with God. For by doing these things, actively developing these virtues, you will never stumble in your spiritual growth and will live a life that leads others away from sin." We were not leading people away from sin. We were leading people into sin, to being separated from God, to being lovers of the world, to being worshipers of man rather than worshipers of God. And the greatest thrill in my life and Ray's life is today next week we're in county jail every day, taking the chapel service, singing, sharing our hearts how God has so richly blessed us, even though we set our hearts to be famous, to be rich, to be all of those things, like Joe said, because we had cut off God. And this is my home. I love it here. I love being part of such a great family. I love those who help me find my place and my calling. And there's no greater thing in life. There's no greater place in life and joy in life than to find why you truly were born, and to be a part of that. Ray and I help with the sound every week, and I think, Father, it's just wonderful that we can be here, and the gift and talent that you've given me can find its expression in a place where people are truly giving their hearts to know God. And I'm so grateful that we got the opportunity to come and be not members, to be part of what God is doing here at this time.
And thank you very much, Andy. And so you've just heard some very moving testimonies from Ray Nino and Andy Kidd and Joe English. And one of the things that you heard, if you were listening very closely, is that we all have this desire in our heart that God puts in our heart. Even from very young age, God puts that in our hearts to know Him. And even though the devil has come in all our lives to try to take that away, you've heard from three men who really wanted to know God, and God's keeping power was on their life through everything they went through, and they're sharing with you now how they love God with all their heart, and God's brought them to this place where they have so much peace in their heart. So we thank you for listening. Again, this is Word of Faith Speaks Out. You're hearing about Word of Faith Fellowship and our members and what God has done. Please go to our website, wordoffaithfellowship.org, to hear more about our church. You can email us with any questions. That's truth@wffnc.org. And we will be back Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. Thank you very much.